Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive with us. Today, we're diving into an article all about the 2024 election. And, things are heating up. This article really focuses on Kamala Harris and some choppy waters she seems to be navigating right now.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting time for this analysis to come out just weeks away from Election Day. There's definitely a lot of anxiety surrounding this election right now, and the article really picks up on that.
It really does. It feels like everyone's holding their breath, waiting to see what happens. So the article jumps right into it, talking about where the race stands at this moment. According to the polls right now, Trump's got a slight edge, specifically in those key swing states. And this is what I thought was really interesting. Even offshore betting websites are putting their money on Trump.
Oh, wow. That really adds another layer to things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Makes you wonder what those sites are seeing. What are they picking up on that maybe the polls aren't? This actually ties into one of the article's main points. It suggests that Trump is really actively engaging in this campaign, visiting those swing states, doing tons of media appearances, and meanwhile, Harris seems to be struggling to make those same connections.
Yeah, you're so right. The article goes on to talk about Harris's recent dip in the polls, and they say a lot of it stems from what they call a failed media blitz. They even go so far as to critique her speaking style, suggesting that it's just not resonating with voters.
It's a pretty harsh assessment for sure.
Yeah.
But this is where the article gets really interesting, I think. It moves beyond just what she's saying, to how she's saying it. They compare her approach to Trump's quite a bit, pointing out how he's been really leaning into things like podcasts and rallies to get his message out, arguably reaching a much wider audience that way.
It's true. It does make you think about how important a candidate's communication style is, especially now when everything is so visual and soundbite driven. So the article points out that Harris has been trying to counter all this negativity by bringing in some big-name celebrity endorsements. But here's the thing. The article doesn't seem convinced that these endorsements are going to be enough to really turn things around for her.
Yeah, that's a classic campaign strategy, isn't it? Trying to use star power to boost your image. But I think, like the article suggests, it might not be so simple this time around. The political climate is just so charged right now. People seem really focused on the issues. And a celebrity endorsement might not have the sway that it used to.
Right. Okay, so we've got a tight race. We've got a campaign that seems to be struggling. And then, boom. Plagiarism allegations. This is where the article takes a really sharp turn.
This is definitely the part that jumps out at you. So the article cites an analysis from the Washington Free Beacon, which is a conservative publication, and they claim that Harris plagiarized parts of a congressional testimony that she gave back in 2007 on human trafficking.
Yeah, and it's not just like a couple of lines here or there. The article says that 80% of her 1,500-word testimony was taken from a statement by Illinois DA Paul Logley. That's a pretty big accusation, especially in the middle of an election that's already this intense.
It's a big one, and the article really breaks it down. They even point out that some identical typos appear in both statements. And to make matters even more complicated, the article reminds us that this isn't even the first time Harris has been accused of plagiarism. There's been scrutiny around her book, Smart on Crime, as well.
It's like a double whammy. And then on top of all that, the article keeps coming back to Harris's communication skills. Or, maybe lack thereof. It gets pretty brutal, honestly.
Yeah, they don't hold back. They suggest that she relies heavily on scripts and teleprompters.
Yeah.
And that kind of implies that she's not genuine, or that she can't connect with people on a personal level. They even bring up her suspended 2020 campaign.
Yeah.
And attribute it partly to her struggles with communicating and connecting with the public and the press.
It makes you wonder if this criticism of her communication style is being kind of amplified by the plagiarism allegations. Does it make people question her authenticity even more, especially when the article brings up those, confusing word salads she supposedly delivers when she goes off script?
It's possible. I mean, these allegations, regardless of whether they're ultimately proven true or not, could easily feed into those pre-existing doubts that people have about her ability to communicate effectively. And that's a huge problem in a race this close. Especially because, according to this article, Trump is expected to have a very strong showing, maybe even stronger than his previous runs. It's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out in these last few weeks before the election.
Yeah, speaking of playing out, what do you think this is all going to mean for the election as a whole? I mean, we've got an extremely tight race. We've got a candidate who's struggling in the polls. There's all this criticism of her communication style. And now this plagiarism scandal. What does it all mean for Harris and for the final outcome?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? The article doesn't come right out and make a prediction, but you can definitely get the sense that this could be a major blow to Harris's campaign. in a race this close. Any negative press, especially something as potentially damaging as plagiarism, could be enough to sway those undecided voters, or even discourage people who are already leaning toward her. And we're talking about an election that's just weeks away.
There's really not a lot of time to recover from something like this, is there?
Not really. The timing here is crucial. If this had come out months ago, Harris would have had a lot more time to address it and potentially minimize the damage. But with the election so close, it's a lot harder to control the narrative. Plus, the article argues that this incident plays into a narrative that's already out there about Harris not being ready for the presidency. They say that she lacks the experience and the communication skills to be an effective leader.
That's interesting. It seems like the article is using this plagiarism accusation to really emphasize those points.
It's very intentional. They use some pretty strong language to describe her communication style, calling it scripted and inauthentic. And now, with this plagiarism allegation, whether it ends up being proven true or not, it just plays into those perceptions. It makes people question her integrity and her ability to be honest with the American people.
It's almost like this scandal is a magnifying glass, you know? It's intensifying those existing concerns about her candidacy.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just about the plagiarism itself, but about how it connects to this broader narrative that's already been circulating.
So where does that leave us? What are some of the biggest takeaways we should be thinking about as we watch this election unfold?
Well, I think the biggest one is that this race is just so unpredictable. I mean, we're in uncharted waters here. Anything could happen between now and Election Day. And this whole plagiarism scandal, it just throws another wrench in the works. It adds a whole other layer of uncertainty to an already volatile situation.
Right, and I think it really highlights how important scrutiny is in these political campaigns, especially these days. When information spreads so fast, voters really need to be paying attention to where they're getting their information from. We can't just take things at face value anymore. We have to dig deeper, ask the right questions, and really think critically about the sources we're looking at.
Absolutely. This deep dive has shown us how powerful information can be, both for better or worse. And it shows how quickly things can change. Even the smallest details can really have a big impact on how the public perceives things.
It's like a ripple effect. One thing leads to another, and suddenly the whole landscape of the election can shift.
Exactly. And in this case, with the race this close, the impact of this plagiarism thing could be huge. It really plays into those worries people already have about Harris's communication and whether she's really ready to step into the role of president.
It makes you think about what qualities we look for in a leader. Do we value experience more? Or communication skills? Authenticity? Integrity?
Those are all good questions. And I think those are the questions voters are going to be asking themselves as they head to the polls. This deep dive has given us a lot to consider about how we assess candidates and how we sift through all the information that gets thrown at us during an election.
I think it's safe to say this election cycle has been full of surprises so far.
For sure. And it's a good reminder to stay informed, stay engaged.
So what does this all mean for Harris going forward? How do you think this is going to affect her campaign in these final weeks?
It's tough to say for sure. There's no rule book for dealing with something like this, especially not this close to the election. But it puts her campaign in a really tough spot. They have to address these allegations, but they also have to try and stay focused on their main message and their policy proposals.
It seems like a difficult balance to strike. They can't ignore it, but they don't want to give it too much attention and risk overshadowing everything else they've been working on.
Exactly. That's where strategy comes in. How do they respond in a way that acknowledges the seriousness of what's happening without letting it derail everything?
It'll be interesting to see how the media covers this too. In the next few days and weeks, will they stay focused on the accusations themselves? Or will they try to connect it to bigger questions about Harris as a candidate and her ability to lead?
Yeah, the media's coverage will definitely have an impact on how the public views this. And with the 24-hour news cycle and social media, things can change so quickly.
It really highlights how much influence the media has over elections. They can choose what to focus on, and ultimately that shapes how voters see the candidates.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important for voters to think critically about the media they consume.
Especially during an election.
Think about the source. Look for biases. Compare what different outlets are saying.
I think this deep dive has really shown us how complicated political campaigns have become in the digital age. There's just so much information out there.
I agree.
It's hard to sort through it all and figure out what to believe.
It really emphasizes the need for voters to be active participants. We can't just passively take in whatever information comes our way. We have to dig deeper, ask questions, and come to our own conclusions.
It reminds us that our democracy depends on us being informed and engaged.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the outcome of this election comes down to individual voters. We have to evaluate the candidates,
Yeah.
the issues, and the information that's being presented to us.
Yeah.
And make our decisions based on what we believe in.
It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
It does.
When you think about how much each vote could matter, especially in a race as tight as this one.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that every vote counts. Participating in our democracy, it's a privilege, but it's also a responsibility.
This has been quite a deep dive. We've talked about a lot, from where the race stands right now to all the scrutiny on Harris's campaign and these plagiarism accusations.
This whole situation, it really emphasizes how important authenticity is and how important it is to really look closely at our political system. We're constantly bombarded with information from every direction. We have to be critical of the sources we're getting our information from, and we need to demand more transparency and accountability from our leaders.
It's a lot to process, but I hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about as you follow this election and make your own informed decisions.
As you're thinking about everything we talked about today, it might be helpful to think about your own process. For evaluating information during an election, what sources do you trust? How do you figure out what to believe? How do you filter out the noise? Those are all important questions we should be asking ourselves, especially now.
Great advice. That's all the time we have for today, but until next time, stay curious and keep learning.